The night I arrived, the rain wouldn't stop. It poured so hard it felt like the sky itself was grieving with me. I remember standing at the edge of that dirt road, one suitcase, one secret, and a heart heavier than the storm. I told myself I wasn't running from anyone, but deep down I knew I was. Because sometimes, running from pain looks a lot like running from guilt. Before we move on, I need to be honest with you. My heart sank when I saw that 99% of you watch these stories but don't subscribe. Please, hit that subscribe button. It means more than you know. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I always love knowing the corners of the world my stories reach. Now, let's begin. The rain had been falling for hours, maybe days. I couldn't tell anymore. Every mile I walked felt like I was stepping deeper into a memory I didn't want to remember. My clothes clung to me, soaked through, and my suitcase dragged behind like dead weight. I wasn't supposed to be here. Not in this nameless village. Not on this forgotten road. Not carrying the kind of secret that could ruin more than one life. I remember the smell first. Wet earth and wood smoke. Somewhere ahead, I could see the faint orange glow of a lantern, swinging gently through the mist. For a moment I thought it was a mirage. But as I drew closer, I saw him. A young man, standing beneath the edge of a crooked roof, watching me with eyes that carried warmth and caution in equal measure. "You shouldn't be out here," he said. His voice low, almost drowned by the rain. "I didn't have a choice," I replied, shivering, trying to sound braver than I felt. He studied me for a moment, then stepped forward, offering his hand. "Come, you'll catch your death if you stay out in this storm." I hesitated. Trust had never been my weakness, but lately I'd lost the luxury of faith. In people, in promises, even in myself. Still, something in his tone, not pity, not curiosity, but genuine concern, disarmed me. I took his hand. It was warm, rough, real. He led me through narrow lanes where the rain ran like rivers, past shuttered windows and quiet homes, until we reached a small wooden cabin on the edge of the village. It wasn't much, a single room, a flickering lamp, the faint scent of wood and salt in the air, but it felt safer than anything I'd known in months. He hung my wet coat by the door, his movements careful, deliberate. "Name's Elijah," he said. I paused. I almost gave my real name, but the weight of it felt too dangerous. "Anna," I said finally. The lie rolled off my tongue smoother than it should have. He smiled, just barely. "Anna, then. There's tea on the stove. Sit." As the minutes passed, the sound of the storm softened into something almost comforting. Elijah didn't ask questions. He didn't look at me the way others had, with judgment, curiosity, or desire. He simply existed in the same silence I was running from. I don't know when I started to feel it, that strange sense of calm. Maybe it was his steady voice, or the way the lamplight touched the edges of his face, softening the hard lines carved by years of labor. Outside, thunder grumbled in the distance. Inside, the air grew still. "You're not from here," he said after a long pause. "No," I replied quietly. Just passing through, he didn't believe me. I could see it in the way his brow furrowed, but he didn't press. Instead, he handed me a blanket, the kind that smelled faintly of smoke and rain. "The roads flood fast here. You'll stay tonight. In the morning, if it's clear, you can decide where you're going, where I was going." The question haunted me. Because the truth was, I had no destination. Just a past I was running from and a husband who thought I was visiting my sister. When I lay down that night on the old couch, I could hear Elijah moving quietly in the kitchen, humming an old tune under his breath. Something about that sound broke through me, the ordinary peace of someone who hadn't yet learned what betrayal feels like. I turned my face toward the window. The rain was easing now, each drop like a heartbeat against the glass. My eyes drifted shut, but before sleep found me, I whispered something I didn't mean to say aloud. "I wish I could stay." I thought he hadn't heard, but in the hush of that small room, I heard his quiet reply, barely above a breath. "Maybe you should." The storm ended by morning, but something new had started. I woke to sunlight breaking through the clouds, touching the floorboards like spilled gold. Elijah was outside, chopping wood, his sleeves rolled up, his breath fogging the air. For the first time in a long time, I watched someone move without hiding. Every motion was honest, simple, and I realized how foreign that felt to me. Honesty. He caught me watching and smiled, and I looked away too quickly. But it was too late. That look, brief as it was, lingered like a spark in a house full of dry timber. I spent that morning helping him around the cabin, pretending it was just gratitude. But beneath every small gesture, the handing of a cup, the brushing of our hands, there was something unspoken, fragile and dangerously alive. By noon, when the sun reached its highest point, Elijah leaned against the doorframe and said, "If you're leaving, the road's clear now." I looked past him, at the long stretch of earth leading out of the village. Freedom waited there. So did my husband, my lies, my life. But for the first time, I didn't move. "I might stay another night," I said softly. He didn't smile this time. He just nodded, as if he understood that sometimes staying had nothing to do with comfort, and everything to do with the ache of wanting something you shouldn't. Outside, the world had dried, but inside me, the storm had only just begun. The nights in that cabin felt longer than any I'd known before. The silence there wasn't empty. It breathed, it listened. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the wind through the cracks, felt like it carried something unsaid between us. By the second evening, the distance between Elijah and me had become a presence of its own. Thick, fragile, waiting to be broken. He had built the place himself years ago after his mother passed. You could see her in every corner, in the way the curtains were hand-sewn, in the chipped ceramic bowl on the shelf, in the single photograph by the window. When he spoke of her, his voice carried both love and loss, like he was still trying to make peace with the past. I didn't tell him that I understood that feeling too well. I spent my days pretending to help, chopping vegetables, sweeping floors, fixing things that didn't need fixing, just to keep my hands busy. But nothing kept my thoughts from drifting. I caught myself studying the curve of his jaw when the sunlight hit it, the callous texture of his hands when he handed me something, the way his eyes softened when he laughed. I told myself it was just curiosity. But deep down, I knew better. The guilt crept in like the cold, slow at first, then unbearable. I'd left a man behind who trusted me. My husband, Daniel, believed I needed time away, a few days to breathe, to heal from everything we had been through. He didn't know that the space I'd asked for had already begun to fill with someone else's presence. That night, after dinner, the storm returned, gentler this time, like a whisper. Elijah lit a candle and its light danced across the walls, flickering over his face. I watched him quietly as he poured 2 cups of tea. "You ever think about leaving?" I asked suddenly. He looked at me, then back at the fire. "Sometimes. But this place is all I've got. It's quiet here. Peaceful. Peace can be lonely," I said. He nodded. "So can love." Something in the way he said it made me look up. His eyes met mine, steady and searching, like he was asking a question he couldn't say aloud. The air between us changed, heavier, slower. My heartbeat quickened, and the sound of rain outside faded into a distant hum. I don't know who moved first. Maybe it was both of us, a shared weakness disguised as need. One moment we were sitting apart. The next, the warmth of his hand brushed against mine. It wasn't deliberate, not yet. But it was enough to set everything in motion. He didn't kiss me that night. He didn't have to. The silence did it for us, a promise made in the space between words. I lay awake long after he'd gone to bed. The candle had burned down to its last flicker, and in its glow, I could see my reflection in the window. Pale, haunted, unrecognizable. I thought about Daniel, about the life we'd built, the vows we'd spoken. I wondered if betrayal started the moment you touched someone else, or if it began long before that, the moment you started craving something you couldn't name. By morning, the air smelled of damp wood and regret. Elijah moved around the cabin quietly, his eyes avoiding mine. We didn't speak of the night before, but everything had changed. Even the way he handed me a cup of water felt charged with meaning we both pretended not to see. Later, when he went into town for supplies, I found myself standing at the doorway, watching the path disappear into fog. I could have packed my things, left before he returned, ended it before it began. But my feet stayed still. Something in me didn't want to leave, not yet. When he came back, the sun was low and his clothes were dusted with rain. He set down the bag and looked at me for a long moment. "You thought about going?" he asked softly. "Yes," I admitted. "But I didn't," he nodded, stepping closer. "Why not?" I didn't answer. Maybe because I didn't know. Or maybe because saying it aloud would make it real. That night, I dreamed of water. Rising, flooding, swallowing everything in its path. When I woke, my throat was dry, my heart pounding. Elijah was sitting by the window, awake, his face hidden in shadow. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "I think people find each other for the wrong reasons, and still can't let go." I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that what we were doing meant something, but I couldn't find the words. Because maybe he was right. Maybe what drew us together wasn't love or destiny. Maybe it was the ache of two lonely souls mistaking shelter for salvation. Outside, the storm had passed again. Inside, we were still caught in it. That night, when he finally touched me, it felt less like passion and more like surrender. As if both of us knew it couldn't last, but neither had the strength to stop. His hands were rough, his breath unsteady, and when it was over, neither of us spoke. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was the quiet before the fall. When I woke before dawn, he was still asleep beside me, the first light brushing his face. I traced the outline of his shoulder with trembling fingers, memorizing it, knowing it was something I had no right to remember. Outside, the first birds began to sing. And for the first time since I'd come to that village, I wished the morning would never come. Morning came like a punishment. The sun was too bright, the air too sharp, every sound too loud. I woke to the hollow quiet of the cabin, Elijah already gone. The space beside me on the bed was still warm, but it felt wrong now, like evidence. I sat there, wrapped in the sheet, staring at the light creeping through the window cracks. The truth of what we'd done was beginning to settle, slow and heavy, like ash after a fire. Outside, I could hear the faint rhythm of an axe splitting wood. Each strike echoed through the still air, steady, merciless. I dressed in silence, each movement deliberate, my hands trembling when they brushed against the table where his shirt lay folded. I shouldn't have touched it, but I did, pressing the rough fabric between my fingers like it could answer something I couldn't say aloud. When I stepped outside, Elijah didn't look up. He just kept working, sweat beading on his skin despite the morning chill. "You didn't sleep," I said quietly. He shook his head. "Did you?" "No." For a moment, we stood there in a silence so fragile it could have shattered under the weight of one more breath. Finally, he set down the axe, leaned against the stump, and looked at me with eyes that carried too much honesty. "This can't go on," he said softly. I wanted to argue, to tell him that what we'd found wasn't wrong, that it was something real in a world that had felt hollow for too long. But I couldn't, because even as he said it, I knew he was right. It couldn't go on. What we had built was born from storm and silence, something beautiful and broken at once. "I know," I whispered. He nodded, but there was no relief in his face. "Only sorrow. You have someone waiting for you. You should go back before you lose everything." The word everything hit harder than I expected. Because what was left to lose? A husband who barely looked at me anymore? A life built on routine instead of affection? Still, guilt found me. It always does. It clung to my ribs, whispering that love built on betrayal never survives the light. I turned away, staring at the horizon where the clouds hung low over the fields. "You think he'd forgive me?" Elijah's voice was quiet. Does he need to? That question stayed with me all day. I moved through the motions, washing, cooking, pretending I was still just a guest passing through. But every sound, every glance, felt sharpened by the truth. When I caught Elijah's reflection in the window, something in his eyes had changed. He looked distant now, almost afraid. By afternoon, the whispers began. The kind that move like wind through dry grass. I'd gone to the small market near the edge of the village, needing air, needing distraction. But eyes followed me, curious, knowing. Two women paused their conversation as I passed. One smiled politely. The other didn't bother to hide her smirk. I felt their stares on my back all the way home. When I returned, Elijah was waiting by the door, his jaw tight. What happened? Nothing, I lied. Just people talking. His expression darkened. They've noticed. Someone must have seen us. The words hit like thunder. Seen us. The world outside our small shelter, the one we thought was hidden, had been watching all along. That night, I sat by the window while Elijah paced the floor. It'll pass, I said, though I didn't believe it. He stopped, looked at me like I was the one he pitied now. This isn't a city, Anna. People here don't forget. They'll keep talking until it becomes truth, and then it'll become ruin. Ruin. The word felt too close to what I already was. When I went to bed that night, I couldn't sleep. My phone, dead for days, had been charging from the small generator Elijah kept. When it buzzed, the sound startled me. One message. One name I hadn't seen in a week. Daniel. Are you safe? Where are you? My throat tightened. I stared at the screen, fingers hovering over the reply button. I wanted to type something simple. Yes, I'm fine. But nothing came. Because I wasn't fine, and safety had long stopped being part of my story. Elijah came in quietly, saw the glow of the phone, and froze. Is that him? I nodded. You should answer, he said. I can't. Why? Because I don't know what to say. He exhaled slowly, sat across from me, and ran his hand through his hair. You can't stay here forever. His words weren't cruel. They were true. And somehow, that hurt more. By dawn, I'd packed my suitcase again. My hands trembled as I folded the same clothes I'd arrived with, now carrying the scent of his home. Smoke, salt, and something unnameable. Elijah didn't try to stop me. He just stood at the doorway silent, his eyes unreadable. You'll go back to him? He asked. I don't know, I said. But I can't stay here. Not after this. He nodded once as if accepting a verdict. Then I'll walk you to the road. The walk was quiet. The rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean. But nothing inside me felt clean. Every step away from the cabin felt like peeling off a piece of myself. When we reached the end of the road, he stopped. Anna, he said softly. I turned, and for a second the world seemed to still. Don't let this be the only truth you carry. I wanted to tell him I wouldn't, but lies were easier than promises now. So I just said, Goodbye, Elijah. He watched me go until I disappeared beyond the bend, and though I kept walking, part of me never left that village. The part that learned that love, when born from guilt, doesn't die quietly. It lingers, it haunts, it becomes the echo of a truth you can never speak aloud. I didn't look back when I left the village. I told myself it was better that way, to walk forward, to forget, to let distance do what forgiveness couldn't. But even as I boarded the bus that morning, even as the countryside blurred past the window, I could still feel him. Elijah. His voice. His silence. His hands. All of it clung to me like rain that refused to dry. The city greeted me with noise, impatient horns, flashing lights, and faces that didn't care who I was or what I carried. Daniel met me at the station, his eyes soft, relieved. He pulled me into his arms, and for a moment, I almost convinced myself that nothing had happened. That I was the same woman who left. Welcome home, he whispered. Home. The word didn't feel the same anymore. The first few days passed quietly. I told Daniel the rain had trapped me longer than expected, that the roads were too dangerous. He believed me. He always did. But every lie I told built another wall inside me, and soon I was living behind them, suffocating under my own deceit. He noticed. He always noticed. "You're different," he said one night, his eyes searching mine. Did something happen there? I hesitated, my breath caught between truth and cowardice. "No," I whispered finally. Nothing happened. But something had happened. Something I couldn't undo or explain. I had fallen in love with someone I wasn't meant to. And though I'd left him behind, the ache hadn't left me. It followed me in the quiet moments, in the sound of rain against the window, in the faint scent of smoke that somehow lingered on my clothes long after it should have faded. Nights became the hardest. Daniel would fall asleep beside me, his hand resting gently on mine, and I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every memory like a forbidden film. The way Elijah's voice dropped when he said my name, the warmth of his breath when he whispered goodnight, the look in his eyes when I told him I was leaving. One night I dreamt of the village again, the cabin, the field, the road. Only this time it wasn't raining. The air was dry, the soil cracked, the sky colorless. Elijah stood by the door, waiting. But when I called his name, he turned away. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, my chest aching like I'd lost him all over again. Weeks turned into months. Life continued. Daniel started talking about the future again, about plans, vacations, the house we might finally buy. I nodded, smiled, played the part of the woman I used to be. But beneath every laugh, every kiss, there was a ghost. One evening, while sorting through an old box of travel photos, Daniel found something that made my stomach twist. A small, weathered photograph, not of Elijah, but of the cabin. I had taken it without thinking, on one of the first days, when the sky had cleared after the storm. The image showed the slanted roof, the crooked fence, the soft green hills behind it. "What's this place?" Daniel asked, holding it up. My throat went dry. "Just somewhere I stayed when the bus broke down." He smiled, unaware. "Beautiful. Peaceful, too. You should have taken me there." I forced a smile. "Maybe someday." But we both knew that someday would never come. As the years passed, the memory dulled, not vanished, just softened around the edges. I stopped expecting to hear his voice in the rain. I stopped checking every unknown number, every distant message, hoping it might be him. Elijah became a name I no longer said aloud, but one that still echoed when the world grew quiet. Then one afternoon, it rained again, hard, sudden, familiar. I stood by the window, watching the street flood, and something in me broke open. The sound was the same as that night I met him, heavy, relentless, and alive. I closed my eyes, and for a moment I was back there. The dirt road, the lantern light, the warmth of his hand reaching through the storm. I realized then that not every love is meant to be kept. Some are meant to wake you, to show you who you are when no one is watching. Elijah wasn't my forever. He was the mirror that made me see the parts of myself I'd buried long ago. Daniel came up behind me, wrapped his arms around my waist, and rested his chin on my shoulder. "You always stare at the rain," he murmured. "I like the sound," I said softly. "It reminds you of something, doesn't it?" He asked. I hesitated. Then I turned my head, pressed my cheek against his. "Yes," I whispered. "It reminds me of a place I once found, and the person I had to leave behind." He didn't ask who. He didn't need to. Some silences, even between lovers, are sacred. Outside, the rain kept falling, steady, endless, like forgiveness that comes too late. I don't know if Elijah ever thought of me again. I like to believe he did, at least once. Maybe when the storms came back to his village, or when he stood on that same dirt road, watching another traveler lost in the rain. Maybe he offered them shelter too. Maybe he learned, as I did, that sometimes love isn't about staying. It's about letting someone find their way home, even if that home isn't with you. And when the storm finally faded that night, I stood there for a long time, listening to the last drops hit the glass. Each one sounded like a memory I had finally learned to live with. The rain had started everything, and now quietly it was teaching me how to end it.